It's been a long time in the making. It's an enormous, ambitious project. And tonight, I think, will show you the level of ambition that both the exhibition and the book and all of the accompanying materials that have gone and been created around this project represent. We have a plethora of people, which I think are also representative of the project. These projects, typically any curatorial project, takes a really enormous village to put together. This one took even more than your regular village, and I think you're going to see a representation of that. Tonight, you're going to hear from the Triennial's curators, from the participants in the book, the participants in the Triennial, authors and contributors to the publication. You're going to hear from our publications department lead as well, and just get a really rounded sense of what this project really is and the richness that there is, and there are many layers that there is to it. So my job is just to welcome you and also make sure that I introduce to the next speakers that are going to come up and introduce themselves. This was a project that was done together with another Smithsonian museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. And we're very lucky to have Shanita Brackett, the acting director for NAMAC, here with us today, as well as Michelle Commander, the museum's deputy director. So I'm going to pass it on to Shanita to say a few welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shanita. How are you all? Excellent. It's wonderful to see you in this space. I'm going to have just a few words as well. I'm not the most important person in this room. We're here to really talk about those who have lent their talents and expertise to this wonderful project. As Maria mentioned, and thank you, Maria, for your warm welcome, I'm Shanita Brackett, the acting director for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm pleased to be here tonight to mark this very important book launch, the book launch of Making Home, Belonging, Memory, and Utopia in the 21st Century. The Smithsonian Design Triennial has been a great opportunity to showcase the institutional collaboration that we've really followed for quite a while now. And it builds on our strength and expertise across our two museums. I'm honored to celebrate our curator, Dr. Michelle Joan Wilkinson, curator of architecture and design at NAMAC. She's been central to this collaboration and part of the Triennial's core exhibition project team. Michelle has worked with Cooper Hewitt for the last 3 years, and she's also co-editor of this publication. This project culminated in the exhibition that opened in November. Also want to send a thank you to all of the team members here tonight. I can't wait to hear what you all present and share with us. I'm excited to learn along with everyone here, and I will be back. So that's all I want to say. Thank you again, and I invite Dr. Michelle Commander to share more words with you.
Good evening, everyone. I am a former professor, so I have some things to say. A little embarrassed, but here we go. By the length, I'm embarrassed. Okay. So I'm Michelle Commander. I'm the museum's, NAMAC's deputy director, and I am just so glad to be with you here tonight to celebrate this book launch of Making Home. At NAMAC, I oversee our museum's publications as well, and so I was honored to work with the curatorial team and editorial teams on this project. I had a small role in the book, though the conversations that Kevin Young, NAMAC's former director, and I had with the curatorial team along the way, and that includes seeing sneak peeks into the art, design, and exhibit layouts, were quite compelling and exciting. It was a thrill to celebrate the exhibition opening in the fall, and I am just so proud of the co-editors who completed much of this ideating, writing, and editing for this book project alongside the tough work of collaboration, managing everyday curatorial work outside of the project itself, and coordinating and curating every aspect of the project over the past few years. Afterwards are always tricky. There's a temptation to remind the audience of the highlights from the narrative journey on which they have traveled to get to the conclusion of a book. I was drawn to reflect a bit on my life as a Southern African-American woman whose past research across Ghana, Brazil, and the US South explored questions of home, belonging, and nation, tracing the very real migrations of African-American travelers and expatriates since the transatlantic slave trade. I wrote a bit about how the painter, Buford Delaney's embrace of abstraction, helped him see more clearly the theoretical contours of home. Delaney grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, a place I made home for 8 years in the 2010s. And he fled the South not too long after the Knoxville riots erupted during the Red Summer of 1919. Delaney first headed to New York City before spending the rest of his life in France. Over the course of some 50 years, Delaney created landscape paintings of Knoxville that increasingly became less focused. Each iteration is almost refracted, blurry and less sure and less finished over time, which at first blush might indicate that Delaney's increasing disconnect from home after the passage of so many years was something that was lessened rather than a sharpness of confidence about his identity in relation to home. So for me, Making Home demonstrates the ways that disparate histories open up heretofore unknown or unheralded narratives about a range of peoples, places, communities, tribal nations, and so on. I've been thinking lately about how this exhibition and its complement in book form allow us to transform from museum visitor or reader to willing witnesses. We do the hard work of looking, of moving through these artists' and designers' creative visions, from realist renderings to the more speculative. These varied notions of home and placemaking, evidences of displacement and refusals, battles over land and property, home and longing, and so on, really help us to see just how varied and disparate and important it is, really, to think about these histories and visions for home. Indeed, these visions of home are real and felt. They can be and are often contested and fraught. One person's clarity about home may run counter to the next person's sense of belonging. These are tensions from which we should not run. And now that we've seen and read Making Home, I'm assuming you've read the book. If not, it's for sale afterwards. We cannot and we should not, after looking and witnessing, look away unchanged. Making Home truly represents the best of the Smithsonian and the rich, layered storytelling we commit ourselves to and encourage. This project showcases the power of collaboration across our museums. And so I want to thank Maria and the Cooper Hewitt once more for their partnership in this endeavor. Congratulations to this fine curatorial team, that's you all. And all the phenomenal artists and designers whose work helps tell the story, and the other dedicated contributors to this project. Job well done. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Shanita, and thank you to Michelle. It's hard to follow what you have shared, and just imagine that was the afterword for our book. I'm Pamela Horn. I'm the Director of Cross-Platform Content at Cooper Hewitt. As I continue to navigate with my colleagues this changing time in the museum and cultural heritage sector, combined with the ever-shifting challenges of the print publishing landscape, I'm once again profoundly moved and honored to have served as the publisher for our Cooper Hewitt imprint. This program will reveal the journey that was, bringing the book from concept, Making Home, into the intimate and personal collection of more than 70 striking realizations, realities, and dreams that is home for its contributors. The book offers portals and connections, connection points and scenarios, neighborhoods and windows, all gathered here as offerings shaped by our designer, Sunny Park, our editors, and all of its authors. It's a gift in every sense of the word to welcome you all to a celebration for making home, belonging, memory, and utopia in the 21st century. Thank you.
Ooh, we filled up. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to say a few words about belonging, and then I will give it over to Catherine. Thank you so much for being here today. And so when we first began conceiving of this book, we each thought about a critical topic that would be important to address. And for me, that was the notion of belonging. Although belonging can be defined as a connection to a place or an environment, it can also be used to identify a possession. The longing to feel settled in a place or social group and the desire to acquire land, wealth, or power have been at the root of the US experience for centuries. As a society, we continuously seek out and try to create moments of belonging in our lives. Yet we also design communities, cultural frameworks, and governance systems that perpetuate discrimination and limit opportunities for belonging. And this is a duality that is experienced every day by people living under US sovereignty. Many of the contributions in this section reflect on how feelings of belonging as well as othering have shaped identities, influenced relationships, and defined purpose throughout life. At times, the authors do this by reflecting on historical events, personal histories, or contemporary issues that impact home in the 21st century. Ultimately, this section is about the experiences that contribute to an individual's overall sense of societal membership, of feeling that they belong despite the never-ending obstacles to inclusion that they face in their daily life. The triennial, as we've heard, focuses on the US tribal nations and US territories, was a chance to not only provide a range of perspectives on the idea of home or the definition of home, but also to highlight the states and territories that are not part of the continental United States. Obviously, 25 site-specific installations that are presented in the show do not cover the expansive territory of this country, but we use this publication as an opportunity to bring in voices from places like Guam and Alaska, and even what it means to find a sense of belonging outside of the US. So with that, I'll introduce Catherine McKinley, winner of numerous distinctions of writing and curatorial work. She is the author of several critically acclaimed books, most recently, The African Lookbook, A Visual History of 100 Years of African Women. Catherine, you wrote a very poetic essay on finding belonging in the country of Ghana, a place you refer to as your mother's home.
Thanks so much for, is it working? Yeah. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I want to say thanks to everybody involved. It's been a wonderful experience. Just a little backstory on the essay. I'm writing about a 4-year stay in Ghana after a year of revelation of meeting 15 siblings and my biological parents. So it's really about growing up Choctaw and African American in a white adoptive home in the 60s, and the kind of the enormous discontents of living in a kind of keep house, cut off from any kind of ancestral knowledge or connections, and then going to Ghana in search of something outside of all that I'd found. at home in the US. So I'll just read a little bit and then can move on from there. Ghanaian high life singer Samuel Owusu's hit Veranda returned to FM radio in 1999, the year I moved into an Accra compound house. A compound house is an intergenerational, multifamily abode with interconnected units around a courtyard where much of the living is done, mostly communally. Compound houses are owned for generations by a family head, which resides in the main house with their nuclear family and occupies a place of status related to the traditional, I'm sorry, I have bad eyes, traditional clan leadership systems and a role as a benefactor to poorer relations who reside there. A Ghanaian compound house, even today, much like an ancient-rooted cosmopolis, the world inside those walls is similar to a village, in size sometimes and in governance. Each compound does not so much reflect a world as it makes the world. The design is what shaped Accra and the country, its rules and its voice. Below the surface of those now unremarkable 21st century, often declining and ugly structures is a resilient cultural and metaphysic world that is centuries old. When I lived there, I understood only a little of the two Ghanaian languages, Twi and Ga, combined in Owusu's lyrically dense but seemingly banal song. You want to have a monkey, but you don't have a veranda. I'm sorry we don't have the song, it's a great song. Ghana is a linguistic culture that is rich with proverbs. How often do you see a monkey in the city? Occasionally, one might leap out suddenly at you as you neared a house, chained to the front porch, but monkeys were not aspirations. They were considered mildly dangerous nuisance animals from the realm of hunters and fetish priests. Houses were aspirations. As the tempo of Veranda rose and the music lapped and rollicked, the song lost its banality, and you soon felt all the intended evisceration, innuendo, and aspirational joy. Kasantui, he declared at the bridge, speak and let it scratch someone. So this is really about learning about voice and belonging within this kind of crazy house of about 100 people who are interrelated and often at war with each other.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Give it up for Catherine. And memory.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Joan Wilkinson, one of the co-curators for the exhibition. Next to me is Curry Hackett, who is one of the participant installation. What is the name of the installation?
So That You All Won't Forget.
So That You All.
Speculations on a black home in rural Virginia. Yeah,
Perfect.
it's a long name.
So Curry is both in the exhibition and also in the publication. And so for those of you who've seen the book, you may realize that while the exhibition has about 25 participants and many of them are teams, so it's a lot more than 25 people, the book does represent the installations and the voices from the exhibition, but it also goes beyond that to look at participants that are, I think, about 70 contributors to the publication. So I'm going to talk a little bit about memory, which is the section that I had the responsibility of editing. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a long time. As Christina mentioned, when we talked about the rubrics for the book, one of the words that came to mind for me was memory. And I started thinking, are there other words? I thought belonging was really strong. I got really excited about Utopia and the idea of going forward. But memory kept resonating with me, and so I stuck with it. So as you read the book, you'll see that the first essay, after my essay, is by Afro Chic. Afro Chic is Janine Hayes and Brian Mason. And they're looking at different types of memory in that essay. They talk a lot about Black home ownership and America's collective memory. They also look at the individual memories of Black homeowners and really think about how design becomes a language of memory in the Black family home. They also lead us and tease us with the concept of, quote, the hard work of forgetting, which speaks to the, quote, shaping of the collective memory to fit a preferred narrative, especially the level of effort to imagine and reimagine American history in ways that do not meaningfully or accurately include Black people, end quote. So this kind of idea of memory and resonance, at the same time, the hard work of forgetting and what it means to make home in the USA. So exploring why memory was so significant for Black people really makes sense if you think about what Afro Chic is talking about, that narrative of erasure and Black people having to, Black people having to navigate the erasure of their experiences and subsequently their memories. I began my intro into the memory section with a poem by Lucille Clifton. The poem is called Why Some People Be Mad at Me Sometimes. Ask you to hold that. They ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories. And I keep on remembering mine. That's the whole poem. Why some people be mad at me sometimes. So I thought that that really spoke to some of the things that I wanted to get at, thank you, in the chapter. And it also seemed to really resonate with what Afro Chic was talking about in their sort of introduction. For a lot of us, we thought about, essays that could serve as lead essays. We also thought about photo essays. So in this chapter, there are 2 commissioned photo essays, one by Sheila Pre-Bright, which is looking at really like family, land, and ancestry in coastal Georgia, and the other by Curry Hackett, which I can say what I think it's about, but he's gonna tell us what he knows it to be about. But I was really fascinated looking at a lot of the visual work that he'd begun sharing on Instagram maybe 2 years ago, where Midjourney, which is a way in which you feed words essentially into a system to create graphics that you're training it on. His images seem to have a kind of nostalgia for a life that we didn't know, but maybe sort of in some recesses of our memory. And I thought that inviting him to do a visual essay in the memory section, and also looking at my adopted home of Washington, D.C., and we kind of share that, would be, a way to also kick off the section. So I'm gonna pass it over to you to talk about your work.
Sure. I think that's a great narration of the project, and thanks again to you and to the rest of the team that was involved in having me be a part of the project, of this project and this project. I think this was, I appreciated in our early conversations about what like a visual essay for this project could look like, and in those initial conversations, you were sort of nudging me sort of to think about like what DC and my relationship to DC. I lived in DC for 12 years. It was my first time living in a major city. I'm actually from the rural South. I grew up in Farmville, Virginia. It's in the southern part of the sort of Piedmont region of the state. And, came to Howard to study architecture, stuck around, taught at Howard. And so I ended up living in DC for a total of 12 years. But the more I sort of lived there, the more I got to know, folks that were born and raised, multi-generational Washingtonians, the more the city kind of opened up to me in really surprising ways, namely the natural landscapes in the city. And so DC is like this relatively small city, it's like 60-something square miles, but there's, multiple rivers, right? All sorts of creeks and streams and gullies and ditches and all these things. And so, I sort of settled on this direction as an opportunity to celebrate and speculate on Black relationships with the natural landscape in DC, while also kind of mixing in these sort of tropes that I think are specific to DC in particular, but like, let's say predominantly Black cities more generally. But you'll see throughout the essay scenes of people using like, it's a sort of riff on the four-wheelers that we might see in Baltimore, in Harlem, or in DC, but instead they're in Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, with the lily pads, surrounded by lily pads. Or you might be thinking about the tidal basin instead of this kind of inaccessible waterway. Actually, what if it was sort of flooded for rice cultivation, right? So clearly, also like trying to put DC in relationship to the coastal South. So namely, let's say South Carolina, Southern Georgia, Central Virginia, Appalachia.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we have some of the other images. Yeah, so we're looking at the kind of four-wheelers that you were just mentioning, and H Street Northeast, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the atmosphere we were going for.
In addition to the landscape, what are some of the inspirations? I'm seeing quilts. I'm seeing transportation. So can you talk us through what is your process in kind of creating these images?
Yeah, I think throughout my practice and maybe just who I am as a person, I'm always just thinking about the kind of quotidian, the so-called mundane, and how, especially in I teach architecture, and a lot of times we think about architecture as these big monumental, heroic projects, and I actually find that there's so much richness and sophistication and ingenuity in the everyday. And I think when we think about a city like DC, it's the first predominantly black city in the States, has a really long, rich history of music and culture and placemaking and all these things. And for me, I find that there's so much that I can learn from just kind of looking and listening slowly, and sort of sitting with the so-called messiness of the street, and again allowing my mind to just kind of wander through a tool that is not as concerned with truth, or allows me to kind of, as I say about the project downstairs, allows me to kind of remember and imagine at the same time.
Yeah. In looking at this image, actually, I think just this weekend I was on National Mall, and I saw a kiosk, and I hadn't thought about the kiosks that say refreshments right on the mall, but I saw that, I thought about this, and now seeing it again, it's just kind of full circle. I do want you to mention a bit about what is downstairs, but I'll kind of say before you mention that one of the things I was thinking a lot about in memory was also memory as we age, how we care for memories. And so you'll see that in the section on memory, there's also kind of a discursive line there about aging, about housing for people as we age. How do we care for memories? The term memory care was a term that I learned only about 5 years ago, but it became really not just poetic, but just really poignant, because I have a mom that's 88. Right now, she's not showing signs of needing memory care, but as we know, when we age, we do have cognitive challenges, and those cognitive challenges often come with the loss of memory. And so what is, senior housing? What is the future of housing for aging? One of the things you were able to do with your installation downstairs was to kind of have an intergenerational conversation with your mother. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, the installation is really a love letter to my family's farmland in rural Virginia, about 100 acres of land that we've had since the 19th century. And so when you walk in the room, you'll see it's kind of like a curtain of tobacco leaves, which was one of the many crops that we grew on that land. But my mom was the art teacher in my high school and is a visual artist. And a lot of what I do now, whether it's as an educator or as an artist, is really related to her ability to take found objects, crafts that she learned from her mothers or her aunts or her relatives, things like quilting and things like that, and it was an opportunity for me to kind of blend all of those interests together. And so when you walk into the room, you'll see that there's actually a painted canvas that I commissioned her to do, especially for the show. And so it's actually a portrait of her grandmother, so my great-grandmother. And then in a kind of Faith Ringgold-esque way, she hand quilted around the perimeter of the canvas. And so, it was really an opportunity for me to, I was just fascinated by the idea of me sort of acknowledging, my relationship to her work and all of the lessons that I kind of had picked up from her along the way in her art classroom. And also, I think talking about memory care and like the ability for memory to kind of transport and things like that. The smell of the tobacco, I think, is also intentional, in sort of rooting people in another place or in another time. So yeah, all of that is kind of at work, I think, in the room.
Yeah. And by way of conclusion, I'm going to introduce Curry because I forgot to read his bio. So Curry is not just a participant in Making Home, but he's also a transdisciplinary designer, artist, and award-winning educator. His practice, Wayside, explores relationships between culture and land to inform meaningful art and critical research. He's taught architecture at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville School of Architecture, Howard University, and most recently, City College, New School, Spitzer School of Architecture. All right, you're up.
Thank you so much.
Hello. I'm Alexandra Cunningham Cameron. Welcome. Here to talk about Utopia, a topic that I immediately regretted selecting when I did. But it all began to make sense, as these things do. You know, I originally wanted to move forward with this idea of organizing a series of writings around Utopia because it was something that I'd been thinking about a lot, you know, as it happens with curators. You know, in the sense of how Utopia, in its grandiosity and its optimism, and also in its futility, had such a deep, deep role in shaping this country. And it began to seem to me that in the last years, we'd lost touch in the US with this sort of expansive, big vision for social good. And we'd sort of receded, you know, maybe even into our own homes and our intimate spaces, into these sort of smaller scale endeavors, you know, where we're trying to find moments of autonomy or bliss or satisfaction, perfection, integrity, connection. And I was curious about this. And then I started asking people to write for the section, like Jarrett, and also receiving writing from many of the contributors in the exhibition to see whether there was a way to sort of make sense of these two ideas. And it began to play out. Thank God. Otherwise, it would have been a challenge to sort of creative thread. But a lot of them were sort of mirroring this sort of intimate scale. You know, they were showing collaboration and growth and making. Some examples are community building projects, working together to care for a family farm, images of a game of cards, a drive across the country. All of these, like, you know, through this sort of intense haze that we're experiencing right now of, you know, tech overload, digital overload, you know, absorption and immense media consumption, began to feel, to me, kind of radical. And so I wanted to sort of go with that. And began to find also many influences from outside the words of the writers and the book, from James Baldwin's novel Another Country, whose epigraph leads the section, to writer and activist June Jordan's letters that propose the need for citizens to claim personal responsibility for the acts of their government, Karl Mannheim's assurances that changes don't happen without acting on ideals. I went back a lot to this 2005 commencement speech that the writer David Foster Wallace gave, which kind of maybe shows you where I was mentally, that I'm reading commencement speeches, like the most sort of inspirational form of writing. And I was really interested in this excerpt in particular, so I'm just quoting. "And the so-called real world will not discourage you from operating on your default settings, because the so-called real world of men and money and power hums merrily along in a pool of fear and anger and frustration and craving and worship of self, Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom of all to be lords of our tiny skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of creation. This kind of freedom has much to recommend it, but of course there are all different kinds of freedom, and the kind that is most precious you will not hear much talk about in the great outside world of wanting and achieving. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty, unsexy ways every day. And speaking from the position of privilege that many of us share, I think it sums up the yearning and hopefulness and desire for connection, the invitation to push against the status quo that really defines the best of utopia. And Jarrett was maybe the first person that I talked to about writing something for this book, who wasn't already implicated in the Making Home project. And I've asked him to come tonight to speak about his contribution to Utopia. And I've now often gone to Jarrett to ask him to reflect on material culture for various design publications I've edited over time. And as an artist and a writer and a curator, he has for many, many years, not to age you, but you know, it's happening.
That's an honor.
Yeah, advanced discourse around an idea of art that is a cross-pollination encompassing the full array of products made from the heart and the hand and the mind. And his practice explores the intersection of art and criticism and queer theory. And also on a personal note, he's allowed me to see my own work as a curator and editor within a context of producers who rely on collaboration and interdisciplinarity to interpret cultural phenomenon. So all of that to say is I like it when Jarrett writes about design because he always comes from an unexpected perspective. And I would love for you to just share a little bit more about Foxfire and Affairs of Plain Living and how you thought about making something for this book.
Wow, what a humbling introduction.
It was
and
longer
very
than I
touching.
anticipated, sorry.
Well, maybe just to say something sort of provocative and then toddle off of stage so that we could do it later. I've been reflecting subsequently after having seen this show and the book has come out. It's been a long gestation period. What does it mean? Like, why was I motivated to bring to propose certain things into this context where Affairs of Plain Living, I wrote about these books that many people know that were part of a lot of people's lives called Foxfire, which are these books about Appalachian crafts that I knew from my childhood, I always loved. And but I've been thinking, like, well, these books were done started in the 60s, they're still in print, but you know, what does it mean to want to bring that into making home of the 21st century? And I think, speaking of utopia as an impossible context or aspiration, and also thinking about the complex history of that word to America, in which there was a bunch of people in subsequent states who said, oh, like, what if we just did life in a different way? You know, like, what if we totally did something different? And one aspect of that implicates design that we all know, that is because it's been reinterpolated into these very elevated aspects of design in American history, is like Shakers. You know what I mean? Which is like, we all know they did some great things. It's like they made a long-handled broom because what if cleaning your own floor was not something humiliating? What if it was something you did as a way of honoring God? You know, like, what if it was a way of being present in your life, in a community? And so, like, okay, we know that thing about Shakers, but I have a real penchant for people who know how to do stuff and that is their life, is like knowing how to do things. And that's what these books are about. I also grew up on a ranch and a farm in like rural Florida, and like my family did stuff. Like, I remember seeing them like slaughter pigs and like build a smokehouse and grind sugarcane with a mule with a grinder into syrup. And it was like, when you learn about that stuff is, One, it's a lot of work. Two, it doesn't save anybody any money. And three, it's really, really important if you want to live your life in a certain way. And I guess what I feel that the utopia now is a future without the internet. I think we do not have a future with the internet. Life on this planet, it cannot go on. And what will happen when that eventuation comes is nobody's gonna know how to do anything. And thankfully, some teenagers in Rabins Gap, Georgia, went and talked to their neighbors and grandparents about how to do stuff, and then put it into this book, into this series of books that I then, because of I work in the art world and I'm involved in conceptual art and in different very high concept photo text things, I saw the beauty and in the intelligence of the way that the students, both in writing and in the making of diagrams and the making of the photographs, all of which they did themselves, was extremely sophisticated and just like visually really powerful. And so you can see up there, that's one spread where they show you how to like, you know, take a log. First, they tell you about all the different kinds of trees and like why you would choose this kind of tree instead of that kind of tree to do this kind of thing. And then how you cut it down, and then how you cut it into pieces. And it adds up into like how you, you know, ultimately can build a log cabin. And so I wrote about that particular story, partly because it's just a sort of tour de force of the project, but also because it was like making a home in a really literal way. But beyond that, the last thought I would have is to say, I love books, and this is such a book is such a beautiful achievement. And I started to think, well, what about if a book is a home? What about if a book is a utopia? Because what a book is it's such a positive gesture towards the future. You make a thing and you put it into the world, into an unknown, to an unknown fate, with the belief that it can be received in some future point by somebody who can do something else with it. And I think that in that sense, the mirroring of that hopeful gesture of the Foxfire books and the profoundly hopeful gesture of this publication kind of mirror each other in ways that I found very, very touching. So thanks for doing it. We're staying? Okay. So like, how do we get rid of the internet, everyone?
Thank you all so much for that. So excited to have you here. My name is Julie Pastor. I'm a curatorial assistant, and I was part of the curatorial team behind this project and this book. And I have to say, reading through it so many times with so many contributors, I mean, it's still something that I'm processing because there's just so much content in it. It comes from so many different perspectives. It feels both personal and academic and incredibly expansive. So really excited to talk with you all further. And each of your contributions comes from such a different lens, and so I'm really excited to have you three here. But all of your pieces kind of speak to this idea of home as it plays out in public and through communities, not so much these private, tucked away spaces that nobody accesses. So I'm curious to hear what each of you think about the role, how you think about the role of community when it comes to making home, either through your piece or through your work. I don't know if anybody wants to start.
Can you hear me? Okay. Oh. Hey. Okay. There we go. I mean, yeah, I can start. I think for me, it's something that I am always trying to get across to my students, again, because I think oftentimes in architecture education especially, at least in the Western tradition, like we're kind of taught that architecture is this, I'm sort of thinking of home in the context of like capital A architecture, right? As something that is a project that is done by typically a solo genius and then, there's this kind of magical point between when it comes out of this genius's head and then when it gets put in the ground. And of course, we know that that's not the case, right? Like we have people that are, exerting physical labor and all these. There's a community embedded in the architectural project. And so I'm always thinking about, if that's true, like how do we talk about home in ways that assumes that communities are ever embedded in the making of home as a matter of course, and then what then can we learn from, whether it's educational methods or it's ways of thinking about new forms of media. I'm always just fascinated by the idea of community in terms of like how we talk about knowledge and labor and relationships to land, territory. And hopefully that then we can kind of jettison, property and all these other things that kind of are sort of bound up in how we think about home and house and plot and all those things.
Catherine or Jarrett, do you have any other thoughts on community or how you thought about community through your piece or the kinds of communities that you were reflecting on?
For me, it's almost like a daily kind of push and pull between, I grew up in a family that was very much like, don't trust people in groups. And that actually it wasn't a paranoia, it actually for me now, it plays itself out every day. I don't fundamentally like and trust groups. And I also have intense yearning and I'm also very social and working on African subjects and traveling regularly and living there. And when I did find my family, my father's Cape Verdean, and I have Ghanaian siblings, and all of a sudden there was another kind of connection. But I do live in this kind of duality of mistrust and interiority, and also the kind of constant seeking and love of the whole thing. But I think the distrust of groups comes back stronger every day, particularly right now.
That's fair.
So I think those are operative for me.
I think the community question is probably something that I should have talked about when I was supposed to be talking about what I wrote. Instead, I was talking about the future. One of the things that emerged for me about I wanted to understand what made these particular books special. Like why there's a little magic about them. And part of what shows you that there was magic about them is when they appeared, they perfectly intersected with a lot of like back to the land and countercultural movements, but like they were like bestsellers and like are still in print and like people love them. And it's like, okay, so what is that thing that makes these different? And I went down to Foxfire Archive, which is in Ravenscap, Georgia, which is also most well known as the setting for Deliverance, the novel and the movies. And they used a lot of people that lived there as actors in the movies, and they didn't really understand the way they would be portrayed. And to this day, there are people that feel deeply hurt by that movie. They're very sensitive. And that gives you a little bit of context for, in order to, so I went down there to go through the archive. And I was trying to make myself seem less scary as like a gay New York art critic. So I brought my mom. It was bring your mom to work day. My mom has a real country accent and she doesn't know anything about art. So it was like a perfect smoke screen. It's like, this is my mom, hi. So I was going through this thing and they have these remarkable archives. And one of the things I found in them that really struck me is that because people there were so scared about being made fun of, they created a contract with everyone that they interviewed that said, I understand that in no way can the material that I provide be used to in any way slander or demean me. Heartbreaking. I mean, journalism. You know what I mean? Also, like, and I had to sign it too, by the way, to access the archive. And, which I was like, this is interesting. But one of the things I want to just read to answer your question is that there's this thing in the archive that the students are communicating back and forth by these like forms for class. It's like, here's your assignment, here's your assignment. And so this is one, the high schooler editor of the project at that time was this guy called Paul Gillespie. And he's leaving a note for his classmate, whose name is Jean Kelly, asking her to interview someone called Mrs. Ada Kelly. It says, your assignment, as you may know, the next issue of the magazine is devoted to all the ways a person could finish and furnish a log cabin after the walls were up and the roof on. In other words, what did he do next? What part would the woman play, and what would the man contribute? Having talked to your grandmother several times in the past, we thought we might ask her for some leads for the next issue, since she's been so helpful before. She might be able to give us ideas and even show us several things that might have gone into an old log house that the family would have made themselves. We need directions for making many of these things and photographs of them if possible. So at the bottom of the page was her response. She said, my grandmother has these things if they might be helpful. And she lists them. And she says, it's okay to make pictures. She also says that the cracks between the logs in the cabins were filled in with red clay mixed with water and left a little rough on the outside, usually smooth as possible on the inside with a small paddle. Some of the cabins were left with the red clay showing, but many more were whitewashed every day with a white clay mixture, making the cracks smooth and white. So it was this really amazing little record of like these conversations. And so this question of community is, it's like, you're talking to your grandma, you're talking to your aunt, you're talking to your neighbor who, you know, even if you're not like related, you depend on each other for stuff. And I think that gave this a whole other level of accountability and investment that's the thing you can feel in the book, is it's like, you know, these are people who live together, like in kind of every sense of the word. And so it's not like someone from the outside.
Thank you. And I mean, I really see that resonating too for Curry and your images, kind of thinking about how these kind of historical practices of design kind of take over public space in a totally new way. And even Catherine, in your piece too, thinking about the design of the compound house and how life is lived in these kinds of public communities. I'm curious, because you all come from such different perspectives, how you think about your work as design or your contribution as design. And this is a design publication like few others I've encountered. I mean, normally when you have a list of contributors, it does not number beyond 70. So I think that, and design is so porous, it's so expansive, like the idea of home, it can mean so many different things through this book. So I'm curious how you thought about that with regard to your contribution and how you see it as part of this book. Feel free to sit, it's okay. With Catherine, with you, I was thinking, you mentioned sort of the contemporary or more modern housing developments in Ghana and how you sort of lose that historical building and how that architecture felt so important to a place. I don't know if that was something that you can comment on?
Yeah, thinking about that, it was, I think that in the, thank you, thanks. In the 60s, 70s, well, by the 80s, there's a writer, Amada Aidu, who, an important Ghanaian writer, and she talked about how at some point everybody's dream was a house in the village that they probably never occupied except for at a funeral or some particular moment, and then a house abroad, like going abroad, building a house at home, and that a lot of the political aspirations and pursuits disappeared. And so it wasn't about investing in Ghana as a country, it wasn't about nationhood, it wasn't about your direct community, it was about this aspiration of property and departure. And it was leaving the country bankrupt. And that's what you do see with the compound houses, so everybody's starting to build these big concrete monstrosities with no, I mean, more and more elites are starting to look at traditional architecture and reinvest, but most of it is like maybe a Dubai dream house or something. So, I mean, I started out in creative writing and I came to photography, art, textiles and design in that way. So, and I think that design has infused my writing, like this piece in particular, in that way. But yeah, I mean, it's a kind of funny, writing and design are a kind of funny odds with each other. But I guess I'm becoming a design head through.
We've converted
in that
you.
way, through that. Yeah. But it's, I mean, it's a wonderful to approach the idea of home through design was a kind of interesting departure because I've traditionally looked at it through textiles or through material culture and not in these kind of large terms.
Yeah, I think to pick up on that, I find myself, the more I am engaging with, not necessarily even architecture, but like images of people in the world, in urban environments, rural environments, engaging with land, you know, meditating on, you know, more than human species and things like that. The more I kind of go down that track, I find myself actually reading and paying attention to scholarship and examples that are arguably less architectural or non-architectural, and find myself reading and absorbing, you know, scholarship from Black studies, cultural studies, religious history, environmental history, and yeah, arguably like my teaching and my practice are getting less architectural, which is to say it's becoming more multidisciplinary or even post or non-disciplinary. And so I think I see my contribution, at least to the book, as really kind of registering sort of just the current moment of where I am mentally, where I am as a practitioner, that's now starting to look sort of really radically out beyond the frame or the discipline to try to inform my place in it and or the world. So that's kind of where I see what I see this work meaning for myself, and it's kind of cool to see, you know, I also see it also maybe performing, at least on some level, as a kind of autoethnography, a speculative kind of autoethnography, right, of a place that I really love. And so if that's true, then like then I can't necessarily be thinking along the lines of like what the sort of disciplinary norms that shape, let's say, Big D design.
Jarrett, I don't know if you have thoughts.
I mean, this is such an unusual context for what design is, and this is a context for design that makes sense for me because it's about how people live their lives, and it foregrounds in every decision that I see in this show and every decision I see in this book that it's about how do people actually live in relation with these things, but with each other, and how do the objects become sort of imbued with that, or like empowered with that relation, that kind of hinge. And I think I have a fair amount of hostility to design, frankly. It always seemed like something that rich people did. I don't know. Like, I remember like going to Design Within Reach and was like, who's Reach? What? And I think that I also found a lot of writing about design to be extremely alienating because it was also not about people's lives. It was about like this object as though it existed in some parallel universe free from the use of like somebody's real world. And so I was like, I guess, you know what I mean? It's like, it looks like a chair to me, you know? So I think that it is an interesting question that you ask, and I think the complexity with which we've all kind of grappled with trying to answer it is actually an index or a measure of how sophisticated and successful this particular project is, because it really feels to me like a great intervention in the way that we must come to talk about design, to think design, to make design in the present and in the future.
Do we go to questions? Oh yeah. I'll give it all back to you. If there's something that you wanted to say either about your own pieces that you didn't have a chance to earlier, I know it's been a stacked program, or if there are any thoughts or hopes that you want people to kind of take away from the book or from your pieces, or if there's any other part of the book that struck you.
I love the materiality of it. The whole thing was quite a surprise because, I mean, I know some of the people involved, I expected great things, but it's a wonderful book. It just kind of threw out all my expectations. And I love the cover, the heft of it. It's a wonderful thing. I'm really proud to be a part of it all. And I'm working on a project about Black homes. It's a book project. And I'm just amazed that in the course of maybe 5 years, how much the discourse around design and Blackness and home and all, it's just exploded. And this feels like very much like it's pushed everything in a really huge direction, like a very unexpected and huge direction. So it's wonderful, yeah.
I had similar thoughts. I really appreciated the kind of the thingness of the book, but how it feels, obviously like on the fingers, but how it just feels to the mind, to the heart, to read and to just kind of browse. I've been having fun reading it at different paces, sort of skimming, reading deeply, and I think also I appreciated that there's some of the even whether it's through the titles or there's like different references to the triennial contributions that are not always directly mentioned. It seemed like rarely directly mentioned, so that was cool. It was almost like a kind of, in a way, the book kind of functions as a kind of secret, which is I thought was really interesting. It reminds me of the Martinican poet and philosopher Edouard Glissant's essay, The Right to Opacity, and where he talks about like, not everything needs to be known or clearly legible by the outgroup or by the mainstream. And so there's a lot of narratives about home and homeness that are, if you kind of know, that, and you can, if I had to like diagram the essays across the book, you would see so many underlying themes that weave into and out of each other in a way that's really, I found really, really refreshing.
I also just want to say that I like the way that the book and the show make space for deep ambivalence, and also home not just as like a happy place for everyone. You know what I mean? Also, it's like the site of most people's deepest traumas. And especially for like queer people, where it's like, actually, I hate my family and this place makes me want to die. And I think that actually is registered in a number of ways in the book and the show. And I just wanted to like shout that out too, that it's instead of like being so wholly positive and affirmative about how great home is, like, because yeah, it is, and people love their families and whatever, their moms were nice to them. But also there's most people who have, and I think what's sophisticated about this book is that by foregrounding people's personal stories, you kind of have so much more space to let that just be in the room. And I was thinking a lot, looking through the book, about like that song that Diana Ross sings in The Wiz about home, and it's like really sad. It's like really beautiful, but it's also really sad, and it's complicated because her, they're trying to kick her out too. They're like, you need to go live in the world, and she's like, oh no, whatever. You know the song.
Thank you all so much. I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. So Alexandra has a microphone if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask.
Hi, I'm Michelle Lanier. I'm very grateful to be a contributor. Thank you, Michelle. I'm someone who, just because of my attention realities, is always doing like 3 things at once. So I've been like doodling and listening and reflecting. And while I've been doing that, I just got a message from a dear college friend that she just was released from the hospital after a major surgery. And I'm thinking, home is also the body. And I'm wondering if any of you would like to talk about the corporeality of home, home in the flesh that we walk with.
Yeah, it's funny, I was thinking a lot about home and disgust, because, and I remember feeling like intense disgust for the people around me and also for the things within it. Like I grew up in a home with, like we had all the dance, you know, we had every piece of dance wear, and we had dinner with, I knew how to polish silverware. But at the same time, my parents were like, they were naturalists and they did not actually give a shit about any of it, but somehow we had it. And it was like this duality of like, it was important that we had Tiffany's silverware and that we ate with it, but there were like pine cones in the drawer with the silverware. But I mean, disgust just comes out of it. And I mean, I have a great love of material things, but I just hated everything that was there. You know, the little Cape house with all the perfect, the Dutch doors, and, you know, somehow it mattered. It didn't matter at all, actually. So, you know, and I think about that also then, how it extended into the body. And even for me, you know, my own sense of my body and not being kind of located in any one thing. So, yeah.
I keep thinking about the part of the reason why I think I landed on tobacco as a primary material for the installation downstairs was just the way that the tobacco was described to me growing up on the farm, and not just as the plant, but the sort of sensory relationship, not even just the smell, but actually like the stickiness when you pick it, you know, the pain in the back, you know, like the in a way that I thought was like perhaps counterintuitively nostalgic. You know, like, oh yeah, I remember, you know, we picked it back, you know, and I think a lot about that. I also think about as part of an oral history project that I adapted as an exhibition or sort of installation a few years ago. In a conversation with my mom, she was talking about how much delight she took in eating the dirt. And of course, in Virginia in the South, use the red clay soil, right, and the iron content. So like that, you know, I can't imagine like you know, a more kind of direct relationship with the land other than like eating the soil, right? So I think the way that the body serves in that way as a kind of a vessel of sort of where the body basically becomes a kind of indexing or registering of notions of home. So I'm all those. I have similar thoughts kind of swirling in my mind as I think about new projects and even as I reflect on this work, both in the book and in the room. But yeah, the body in my mind is like super central, I think, to the work.
Jarrett, I'm thinking too of the moment in your piece when the girls are asking women if they can add perfume to the soap that she's telling them how to make.
She's teaching them how to make soap out of bacon grease and lye. And they're like, can we put perfume in it? And she's like, yeah, totally. But also like, she says this thing, I actually think is quite profound, where she says, I've washed with it for so long, it just smells like homemade soap to me. And I was like, okay, that's talking about the body in a certain way. I also want to shout out something that Alex wrote in her introduction, where she has a quote from Gaston Bachelard where he says, thinking about the home as a space to protect the dreamer. And I think there's something about the relationship between the body as a home and the relationship of the body to the home, but that also is related to this thing where it's like, well, where is it a space where the mind is also free to roam, you know, to dream within the body and related to the body.
Hi, my name is Lydia. So home to me is kind of like transient. I'm a military child. I grew up moving around. So I wanted to have your notes on like chosen family, chosen home. I noticed that there was kind of like a double-edged sword theme going on with home and how it brings out this discomfort sometimes, and especially with queerness and displacement. So I wanted to know if you had any notes on that, and especially in regards to the book as well.
Well, there's that beautiful essay about making a home in yourself, traveling. Who wrote that piece? No, that's not the one.
Devon Tynes?
Devon's piece.
Yeah.
About like, I'm on the road 300 days a year. And so what are the practices, the life practices I've created internally and externally to be at home in a hotel room? And one of the things that was, and it's like a really powerful piece, and it relates to this incredible installation downtown, downstairs, but also about queerness, but also about Black experience, and just, it's such a beautiful piece to read in the book. And one of the details that I thought was like such a smart idea, because I'm also like, love stealing ideas from people. And he was like, I always get orchids and have them in my hotel room, and then when I leave, I give them to my favorite person from that trip. And it's like, that is a good idea. Just a small thing.
I mean, I guess as I'm looking here at the laptop screen and the screen behind me, like really taking seriously the idea of making home, like thinking of home as a practice, not necessarily as a place, I think is maybe I think it's like a very apt and, framing, I think, for any way that we encounter comfort and safety. And, I think the idea of home, maybe in the kind of, let's say, the mainstream ways, is not, as we mentioned earlier, is not a guarantee. And so I think, homeness and the idea of making a home feels like a very human, like maybe one of the most human, one of the most human things we can do, right? And I think that's what's trickling through even in my contribution. I think of DC as a kind of chosen home. I think of Howard certainly as a chosen family. Like a lot of folks that attend HBCUs do. So that to me is like it's like an everyday practice, like the orchids, and then how do you find kinship with others through that practice, as others are kind of going through their own respective journeys of making homes for themselves.
I guess I have a very unformed thought about it, but I've been talking with some people. I was in foster care very early, and I've been talking with people about foster care reform, particularly young people. And one thing that's come up a lot is like an idea of dismantling the foster care system. And what if children did arrive in institutions, and institutions really were the goal was not to be placed in a nuclear family somewhere, but the institution became reformed as the base. And I think that's a really interesting idea, because, I mean, for the rest of us, it was like all of a sudden you were delivered to this perfect place. And it failed in so many ways. And so, anyhow, this project is really about trying to imagine what it would be like if you went by the rule that attachment to even one person was important. Could the institution provide that? How could we reshape possibilities for young people? And so it's a really interesting thing to get beyond the material and even beyond the idea of what constitutes security in terms of attachments to people. So it's an interesting thing.
Thank you so much. So did you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, Kathy's last point made me think about the exhibition that's just to the left here, which is Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, which looks at essentially sort of re-entry or transitional housing for people that are leaving carceral space. And the modules, the mobile refuge room, the units are designed for privacy. And if you think about, someone that might be showing up to a shelter where there are just cots all over and there's no privacy, there's no space for kind of like human dignity and reflection. And what they've proposed are these spaces that have sliding doors that can be customized, but all of these units have to exist within some type of larger institutional facility that allows natural lighting to come in. And so the model that you're just sharing just made me reflect on one of the installations as, I think, thinking through what is the relationship to like social services and institutions for the individual, even when there is a kind of physical space that protects them, but something above and beyond that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the idea of that, like, light and space might be as valuable as mom and dad, or mom and mom, or whatever, or siblings, or any number of things. That's great.
I was just going to wrap it up. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra Cunningham. I'm the curator of public programs here. And we have just a few of the contributors and the participants here on stage. But I wanted to also shout out, before we go into more mingling and talking about the book amongst each other, that we have many contributors in the audience as well. So if you're a contributor to the book or the exhibition, do you mind just standing up? Amazing. So this is just a few of the 70 plus. What was the final number, Pam? 71 contributors to the book. But we're going to go into now time for us. We have until 8. We can talk. You can ask more questions. We also have a pop-up shop here in the back. They're selling the book at a discounted rate, 10% off. We also have some fun items, including a fan. Curry, you want to plug the fan?
They are one of the speculative images that are downstairs in the window. So if you've been in there, you'll see this in the sort of church window moment, and it's sort of a speculation of my great-grandmother's church, which, according to a historical marker, started as a hush harbor.
And we also have the brand new tote bag that just released. So all of these items are 10% off just for tonight. You can purchase with our shop, again, popping up in the back there. Sorry, yeah.
Fans are also limited edition and hand-numbered.
Okay.
If it's okay with Alexandra, I would love if the folks who just stood at least could say what their contribution was to the book or the exhibition, so that as we're mingling, people have a little bit of insight about what they've contributed.
Yeah, we have time. Okay, so who should I start with? You want to go first? Okay.
Easy. Hi, everyone. I'm Mulaney Barnett, and stand. I figured I had a microphone. You can hear me. Okay, I'll start again. Hi, everyone. I'm Mulaney Barnett. Hello. My organization, the Black Artists and Designers Guild, we design the Underground Library, which is actually in Carnegie's original library. And so it is it's an immersive space where you could literally sit on the furniture, take a book, and it's really looking at art and design through a Black cultural lens. So enjoy the space. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Michelle Lanier. I'm a folklorist, writer, and public historian, and I wrote a piece about The Offering, which is the piece by Nicole Crowder and Hadia Williams.
Hi, my name is Marisa Moranjan, and I just want to say, I'm going to sit back down so I don't have my back to you, but I just want to say I loved the book because I am half Chinese, half Ecuadorian. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and my family is all over the world. And really, the sense of dislocation and displacement in the book is the first time that I felt at home with this sense of disjuncture. And yeah, so thank you for the thoughtfulness and the many beautiful, thoughtful contributions that I've been sharing with other people. So my contribution is called Making Care House, and it's about the process of designing what my co-founders and I called the US's first care-based co-housing project, which the first site was intended to be built in Baltimore, but it now looks like it might be in the south side of Chicago. So it's rethinking most of the housing that we have. We have a housing and a care crisis in the United States that many of us feel acutely, and yet the post-war housing that we've inherited has not kept a pace with actual reality. And so our project is really about designing for ways for low-income older adults to share care and live with caregivers and their children. So the intergenerational part. So, 'cause
I'm John Zeisel, and I have an organization called I'm Still Here, which tries to work on finding a way for people living with dementia to be home. And I guess rather than talk about that, I'd like to say one of the thoughts that I had about the book, which was that ultimately, home, and you didn't talk about it, part of what I loved about the book, and Michelle, thank you for including us, and it was an interview that Michelle did with my partner Suchi Reddy here and I, and that being home is a place where if you're queer, or if you're black, or if you have dementia, or if you're Afghan or Ghanaian, or whoever we are, where we don't hate it, because it's in us. And what we've written about, or what we've talked about, is how home is embedded in us and how we carry it with us wherever we are, whether there are the flowers or not. And I guess the question I would have asked, we don't have to do that now, is where's the place that you feel at home? Because a lot of what came out of the conversation and a lot of what the book is about how wonderful it would be, but it's not. And on the other hand, if you create an environment where people who are cognitively challenged can feel at home, it's inside them. And it's that which we're looking for, which is what is human through this lens, is the work we're doing. So thank you for all the comments, and thank you for doing the book.
I'm Suchi Reddy. I'm just going to echo John. We had an amazing conversation, and thank you, Michelle, for including us. My work, I'm an architect, artist, designer. I work really thinking about the body as home and a place that's apolitical and where we feel everything, regardless of who we are and where we come from, and how we relate to our environments that way. And that this is a cyclical 360 relationship where we're acting on our environments and our environments are acting on us. So what do we think about that? From the power that those environments have, what we have over them, how that makes us and how we make them, and where the political, social, cultural, and really sometimes purely physical aspects of that are, and how do we think about them? So I had a great conversation with John, and thank you very much to the curators for including us.
Hello, my name is Tommy Mishima. My installation, I share the space with Liam downstairs on the first floor, and it was called Game Room. My idea of home was pretty much concentrated on what Carnegie, which he used to live in this space, what he was doing, what connections he had while he was alive, and the repercussions of his influence in the world.
Hey, my name's Alan Coe. I'm with Designing Justice, Designing Spaces. This is the installation at the Mobile Refuge Room. DJDS is an Oakland-based nonprofit architecture firm seeking to end mass incarceration, and I think someone in the front row explained it beautifully what we're trying to do with this installation. We are Oakland-based, but I'm here in New York, and we're trying to get this piloted. So happy to have a chat with anyone about that.
Okay, so that's a wrap for the talking portion. Thank you all so much. That was lovely to hear, and let the conversations continue. Buy the book and spread the word about it. Thank you so much.